It started when we called out to the stars, into the darkness. We felt so small, tumbling through the vast emptiness while clinging to the skin of the world, and without a single reason why. We were curious, yes, but ultimately, I think we were just terribly frightened. And we were young, so very young. We were children, and like a lonely, lost child, we did the only thing we could think of to make it stop. We did what we thought we had to do to make the universe make sense. We called for help. For years, we scanned the sky for a sign. We sent signals to the stars in the darkness beyond. Are we alone? But the skies were quiet, always so quiet, leaving us to our own makings. But crying children never cease, and neither did we. We sent calls into every corner of space for decade after decade. We refused to believe no one was out there. They had to be. Yet, for some unknown reason, they never answered us. Everyone remembers when that changed. They think it responded to the Arecibo message from 1974. The response to the Arecibo message was received almost 3 months ago, in 2 separate parts. The first part of the message was received at the Hat Creek Radio Observatory in California. The Allen Telescope Array picked up what sounded like static interference that continued on for over an hour. It consisted of unintelligible screeching and buzzing sounds that continued without pause for the whole hour. The meaning of this message was never discovered, if it had one. The only thing we knew was that the signal's origin came somewhere in the Hercules constellation, near Messier 13. As soon as that signal stopped, the real message began. We made contact that day, and we were asked a question.
Who is there?
It came not through the radios, but as a voice inside all of our heads, asked the question to all of us. I heard it. My wife heard it. The young heard it, and the old heard it. Even the deaf heard it. Everyone, everywhere, heard this voice whisper that question in their heads, in every language on Earth. I remember it almost too clearly. It asked in that familiar, yet indescribable voice that's always there in my mind. It was like one of my own thoughts had gone rogue and had decided to speak directly to me. The world seemed to stop as everyone listened for what came next.
Where are you?
The heavy question seemed to linger in our minds for hours afterwards, and then for days, and then for weeks. That day changed everything. There were doubters from the very beginning, and the holy ones who claimed that God had spoken to all of us, and that the time to repent was now. There were those who claimed they'd heard nothing, and those who'd claim that the aliens had given them their own secret messages. And, of course, there were those who truly believed that we had been contacted for the first time by an extraterrestrial race like us. One ready to communicate, ready to lead us out of the dark. We were wrong. We never made contact with alien life. At least, nothing comprehensible or discernible to human understanding. The stars are vast, and in their vastness, our voices had touched the ears of something truly incomprehensible. Something hungry and malevolent. The voice. We realized our mistake when the ground started to groan. Beneath our feet, everywhere, the ground seemed to moan. The muffled sounds shook through the dust and dirt below us, No one knew what was causing it. At least, not until the calls started coming in. The graveyards were screaming. All at once, the dead had started screaming. Every deceased man, woman, and child was turning in their graves. All the animals did so too. Every dog, every cat, everything that had ever walked this earth. The cries of ancient whales shook the seas, and the shrill screeching of birds echoed in the forests. The caskets shook, and the morgues howled. The voices stopped together in an instant, leaving the world in an amplified silence. In their absence, a new sound filled the air. The voice returned.
I hear you.
It came as a whisper from behind, an ominous, yet oddly playful presence that felt so close, but was truly still so far away. It let us breathe in the silence for a minute, before it made us a promise. It was a promise we all knew to be true.
I am coming.
The voice was gone, and the air was again filled with screams. This time, they were from the living. After the voice had gone, we were left to our own devices. Millions panicked, and rightfully so, as chaos took hold of the streets. Many would die in the violence and the gunfire of that night. They would be known as the raptured before long, and the rest of us were the condemned. We could only wait. The screaming dead was only the first of the side effects we felt as the voice approached. The closer it got, the more we felt it. That first night after the screaming, we noticed the stars bleed for the first time. A section of the western sky had turned black, blacker than the night. It was only truly visible because of the ring of stars around it. The light from those stars had turned red, and they seemed to bleed across the sky like food coloring dropped into water. Their light swirled and flowed all around the edge of some unseen mass. I knew then that I was staring into the face of the voice. Our scientists claimed that nothing was there, and that their radar and scans always came up empty. Their telescopes could see nothing but darkness in that section of space. However, the proof was right in front of us, as every night, that ring of darkness got wider, and more stars bled in the sky. We watched it come. As each night passed, the black spot would widen, and more stars would distort and bleed around it. During the day, a new hell would greet us. The side effects worsened. The day always brought something new. I'm sure most of what happened will go untold and unknown. The animals started disappearing. All of them. No tracks, traces, or bodies were left behind. Pets would run away, some violently so. They all retreated, never to be seen again. The forests were left abandoned, the ocean empty. The air was left silent. The world left seemed empty and lonely. They left like water receding from the shore just before the tsunami breaks. One day, about 2 weeks ago, scientists tried to talk to the voice again. They hoped, perhaps, to reason with it. They told it what was happening on our world and asked it questions. The scientists begged. It didn't speak. The next night, the skies lit up with streaks of fire. It was a light for hours, blazoned with orange and red. We didn't realize the effects until the next day, when the televisions turned to static and the telephones refused to work. We had sat, watching, as all the satellites were knocked out of the heavens. After that, reports became rumors and rumblings. Sanity, a thing of the past. The air chilled and weighed us down. The voice was nearly here, and everyone felt it. It rained for a week after the satellites fell. The rain was salty and mired with an unknown filth that turned the grass black. Maybe the satellites tracked something back in with them when they hit the sky. No one knows for sure. All we know is that it fell from clouds black as charcoal that blotted out the sun. Like liquid ash, darkness fell upon us for days. When the clouds went away, the skies were empty. There were no clouds, yet the sky hung low and gray. If the sun was anywhere in the sky, it never made itself known. Even it had abandoned us. Each day grew slowly darker and darker, until night and day became almost the same. Some people would claim later that they'd seen things in the dark, creatures with gangly limbs and crooked faces, lurking in the corner of their vision. They were tall, white creatures that looked molted or rotten through their transparent skin. Appearances would last for just a second or two, before vanishing without a trace. Some believed this was the first step in the aliens' invasion, but the rest of us didn't know what to think. We just knew that it was nothing that simple or benign. They must have been hallucinations, just more madness to endure, but ultimately as harmless as anything else. As harmless as the screams of the dead, the missing animals, and the dying sky. Appearances slowly increased in the duration and number. I think everyone saw them once at least, but I don't think a single person would ever guess why they were truly here. They never touched nor spoke to anyone, and they certainly never harmed anyone. Most who got good looks at them described them as mournful or sorrowful looking. Some even claimed the creatures watched over them at night, and others even claimed that it seemed as if the creatures were sorry for them. One claimed to have even seen one prostrate upon the ground, hands clasped above its head. He said it was praying for us. Prayer was no help. The churches and places of worship that had divided us for so long failed to bring hope to any in the end. The voice let them pray and beg for a while, but just days ago, the voice ended it all. No one questioned how, for at this point, nothing that happened surprised anyone anymore. But on the final day, all books of worship burned, every last Bible, every Quran, everything. People rushed to their centers of faith, but found no solace. The churches and temples had suffered the same fates, if not worse. The people were left, abandoned by their greatest hopes. There were rumors of churches all over the world, with walls formed from the bodies of those who sought refuge. They were merged to the walls, stuck to them like flies in a trap. They died still pleading for hope, but they were beyond God's help. The rest of us had learned to stop begging. We waited. The final message came. From beyond the sky it fell upon us. The voice echoed, and it spoke the simple truth.
I am here.
There is a darkness beyond the horizon, the likes of which I doubt has ever been seen. It brings with it the screams of countless souls, and it moves fast. The stars are dying now, and I know they'll never be seen again. The light is dying so fast. I leave this not as a warning. No, it's far too late for that. Instead, consider this the last realization. the last humanity will ever know, for we used to wonder whether or not we were alone and lost, but never whether or not we were safe and hidden. The universe is infinite, and our understanding was significantly more finite. We should never have beckoned to the darkness. Instead, we should have clung to the light and closed our eyes every time we were turned to the void. As the final minutes approach, I hold one final truth to be certain. I know now why the skies were always so quiet. I've always had trouble sleeping at night. Noises have disturbed me my whole life. I found out years ago that I have hypersensitive hearing, picking up all sorts of background noises. They couldn't fix it, only recommend the obvious techniques to mask the problem. Not that I hadn't tried these already. Earmuffs, listening to music, and even things like meditation. None of it worked. In fact, it seemed to make it worse. It made her more desperate. I hear her most nights. No one else can. Why does she only come to me? There's always the dread of lying there each night in the dark silence, anticipating when she will come and when I will hear her again. She usually likes to wait until I'm drifting to sleep, so that I jump back to my senses in fright to the sound of her there. Most of the time it begins with a faint crying. She tells me that she wants to make it end. I know she's getting closer to getting me, and some nights I can even feel her cold breath in my ear. I can sense when she's lying close beside me in the darkness staring at me, and sometimes she whispers things like,
"It's only me,"
right into my ear. She's toying with me, like a cat does to a helpless insect before killing it. The thing is, I could never see her, but it slowly felt like she was becoming more real. The doctor later informed me that I suffer from schizophrenia. I've been taking medication for a long time, but it wasn't really working. It just made me feel more helpless. It was difficult for a girl as young as me to deal with this. At least now I could accept that she wasn't real. It was all in my head, and there was nothing real to be afraid of. That was until last night. Last night, her presence felt more real than ever. I could hear her whisper, feel the air on my neck, and even smell her breath. It was all too realistic to handle. I got so scared that I fell back into my old habit of running through the darkness of the house into my mother's bed to sleep beside her where I felt safe. Now that I was older, I knew she was hoping I had grown out of this phase, although I had only stopped doing it because it had made her sad, and I didn't want her to be disappointed in me anymore. She was all I had. If I had the choice, I would be in there beside her every night without fail. I knew my mother had been awoken by me, probably more saddened that I had reverted to my old ways when she thought the medication had been helping me, but it wasn't helping. I had just lied all this time to keep her happy and let her sleep in peace. I curled up in bed beside her and began to sob quietly. My mom looked uncomfortable from the noises I had made and began stirring under the sheets, so I whispered into her ear,
"It's only me."
She sat up abruptly, looking anxious. In the darkness, I saw her reach over for her cell phone and begin to dial a number. I noticed on the screen that she was calling the doctor. "The voices I used to hear," she said. "They're back." Cremation always seemed like a good idea. I never want to be buried in a box, underground, hidden from the world I've come to know and love. It always seemed so sad to me, even as I sit here breathing, legs firmly on solid ground. I feel an immense sadness for those who passed and lay under a mountain of rubble. Their hands would forever be clasped together, fingers interwoven in a self-comforting gesture, as the earth takes its sweet time taking back what rightfully belonged to it. At least with cremation, you wouldn't be as lonely. In a few hours, your body would be incinerated, becoming nothing more than a pile of smoldering fertilizer, placed in an urn, scattered in a garden, on a mountaintop. I don't care, as long as you never put me in that damn box. But that was before I walked past the crematory and caught a whiff of what was emanating from its smoking metallic pillars. It took a second to realize what I was looking at. I read the letters on the building and returned to the whirling smog coming from the stacks. But for some reason, my mind refused to make the connection, and I found myself stopping on the street corner. I followed the smoke up, past its changing hues that went from black to white, from white to nothing, vanishing like a ghost, mixing with the clouds, drifting into obscurity. When I looked back at the building's lettering, I read aloud, "Crematory." Clarity rushed into my mind, and the horrific thought cemented into my brain, forever engraving in my memory. I scrunched my nose and tried keeping the smoke, no, the person, out of my body. But it was too late. Their cooking flesh had already made its way inside, and I felt immense guilt at the first thought that came into my head. Even the voice in my head refused to give the thought a stage. But my mouth started watering, salivating. I couldn't help it. It's like your body knows the taste of something by pure smell alone. The air was ripe with the odor of unseasoned meat. I snapped out of my transfixion with the chimney and shook away my train of thought, but I found myself looking over my shoulder, above the trees, the smokestack still visible from blocks away. I swallowed what I thought was anxiety. If only it were. A few days passed, and I couldn't get the smell out of my mind. Maybe it was just a one-off? I thought to myself. There was no way human flesh could smell that good. I took another walk that evening, lying to myself, saying that I was not going on this little escapade to smell the death coming from that little red brick building. I even thought about only walking a few blocks away, just close enough to see the smoke wave its final goodbye. But when I couldn't smell anything, I justified that a bit closer wouldn't hurt. I repeated this cycle until a familiar faint odor grabbed hold of me. I couldn't stop myself from walking, getting closer to the crematory until I stood on the same street corner as the first day I'd smelled it. The pure aroma of untampered meat. It smelled better than the first time I'd walked past. My stomach growled as I imagined the meat sizzling in the flame, the fat tissue crackling in the heat, the way the meat would melt in your mouth as you ripped a chunk from bone, mashing it between your teeth, the satisfying warmth as it hit the bottom of your stomach. I stood on that corner for what felt like minutes, but in reality, it was hours. Long enough for the smoke to stop and only the rippling shimmer of the chimney's heat to be seen. I hate to say it, but I was disappointed. It was the best thing to ever hit my nose, and I needed more. That night, I looked up the crematory's website. Call it curiosity, but I found the funeral home that the crematory was associated with. Directly on the home page was a list of people who had recently passed and were under the care of the funeral home. Like all funeral homes, they detailed information about the person's funeral service, viewing, and burial. Those who were cremated did not have a burial service detailed in their description. By pure process of elimination, I found 2 people who were cremated, a man in his 80s and another in his 40s. The old man had died a few days before the younger man, and his service was just 2 days prior to that first day the smell caught my fascination. I knew it. I knew it was him. He was the one that smelled so delicious. The second man was heavyset. In his picture, mounds of flesh spilled over his belt line, cheeks plump with moisture. The extra fat had given his scent a hint of gristle, and it was delightful. His meat must have been so marbled, dripping, oozing with that mouth-watering saltiness of lard. I swallowed hard, and guilt reared its ugly head a second time. I smashed the laptop shut, and my palms covered my face. What the hell is wrong with me? I thought. I needed to get over this obsession with the smell, so I did my research. It turns out that the closest thing to human meat, in terms of smell and taste, is pork. I was so excited when I got home from the butcher shop, trudging in with bags of pork chops, pork rinds, ears and feet. I was finally going to scratch the itch that had been tormenting me for weeks. I prepped the meat, some seasoned, others plain. Cookbooks on the counter, trying to surmise the best way to prevent myself from bashing my head against the wall if this didn't go well. I oiled the skillet and lay the meat in the pan. It greeted me with a festering crackle that filled me with anticipation. White smoke wafted off the meat and filled the air with disappointment. The smell was similar, but not the same. It was different, less pure. My face soured even more when I took the first bite. It didn't taste like what I'd imagined. It was as if I could taste the lie, like imitation crab meat when compared to the real deal. I was filled with rage. The way my hand changed from a rosy tinge to white-knuckled rage caught my attention, and my grip loosened. The blood rushed back into my fingers, and an idea popped into my head. I lifted my hand, studying the plump flesh of my pinky. It was skinny, but just meaty enough for me to get a taste of what I needed. The bone wasn't too thick. It would hurt like hell when I snapped through it, but it would be worth it in the end. I grabbed the meat cleaver and placed my hand on the chopping block. I measured the trajectory of the blade and lifted it above my head. I hesitated, letting the blade linger in the air. I was shaking, my heart thudding, but not with fear, with excitement. I brought the cleaver down with all my might. Swishing through the air, it met the chopping block with a hard thud. There was little resistance as it sliced through. My pinky was squirming on the wood like a half-dead insect pleading for death. The nerves coursing through it, firing one last time. It curled and unfurled on a crimson backdrop until it finally died. My hand was on fire, but the adrenaline numbed the pain. I pinched the digit between my thumb and index finger and tossed it into the pan. The skin squealed as the outside crispened. The blood, dripping off the open end, bubbled on the skillet. The smell rose from the pan and into my nose. It smelled delightful. The same smell that was wafting from the crematory's chimneys was now filling my kitchen. It was pure ecstasy. When I flipped it, the underside was nice and charred, the skin crispy and blackened, but I made sure to keep the inside nice and pink. Such a small chunk only took a few minutes to cook, and all the while I was holding back a mouthful of dribble. When I was satisfied, I lifted the finger, teasing it inches from my mouth. My plan was to savor the taste, to make it last, since this meat was so rare to come by. But I was overtaken by an animalistic urge and threw the thing in my mouth. As my jaw crushed through, the bone snapped and a spurt of gooey goodness shot out of the flayed end. My skin pimpled with euphoria. It tasted amazing. I tasted amazing. I had finally scratched the itch. I was satisfied, for a time anyway. I still venture out to that same street corner, though now I do it from the comforts of a wheelchair. My views on cremation have not changed, but I fear that there is going to be very little for them to cremate.